So let me share with you the evening when everything shifted. The evening I entered a space packed with people who barely noticed me at first, and left making certain none of them would ever forget who I was. It all began with a casual invitation. My wife, Rachel, arrived home one night looking a bit worn out. She slipped off her heels by the entrance and said, "Hey, the company's Christmas gathering is next Friday. You're coming with me, right?" I simply smiled and replied, "Of course." Nothing more to it, no big occasion, just a party. Now you need to understand something about Rachel. She is exceptionally sharp, truly one of the most intelligent and dedicated individuals I have ever known. She had been putting in serious effort at this company for 3 years. 3 years filled with late evenings, missed meals, and weekend work, as she steadily rose through the ranks in this corporate finance firm. And she truly enjoyed it. She had faith in the projects. She had faith in her colleagues. She would speak about her supervisor, a man called Derek, as if he were some kind of icon. Derek mentioned this, Derek suggested that, Derek greenlit the latest initiative. I heard his name mentioned so frequently that I almost felt like Derek had become part of our household. Yet I had never once met him in those 3 years. So this gathering would be the first opportunity. Before I continue, let me describe myself, because this detail is important. You see, I don't appear to match what I actually do for a living. I'm a fairly reserved man. I dress in plain attire, I drive an ordinary vehicle, and I don't carry anything showy with me. Rachel often teases that I resemble someone who repairs laptops on the weekends, not someone who, well, you'll discover soon enough. I prefer it that way. I've never felt the urge to introduce myself loudly. I let others form their own opinions. The people who truly count eventually understand on their own. So I wore a neat button-down shirt, tidy pants, nothing extravagant, and we made our way to the event. The location was a stylish rooftop lounge in the city center. It was a lovely spot, really. Twinkling city lights all around, clear night sky above, small heaters placed on the outdoor area so no one would feel the chill, and servers moving about with champagne flutes, as if they had been doing it their entire lives. And the crowd, around 60 or 70 people, everyone was dressed elegantly, everyone was speaking energetically. Everyone was doing that typical thing where they half listen to you while scanning the space to spot who else might be worth talking to. Rachel was quickly drawn into various discussions. A colleague from her department took her by the arm, someone else shouted her name from the other side of the terrace, and within roughly 4 minutes, I found myself standing by myself near the counter, holding a drink, simply observing. Which, to be honest, suited me perfectly. I enjoy studying environments. You discover a great deal about individuals when they assume no one significant is paying attention. That's when I first noticed Derek. He wasn't difficult to identify. He carried that presence you instantly recognize, the sort of man who enters any space and behaves as though it's his own. Tall, sharply attired, with a booming laugh, constantly surrounded by at least 4 others who chuckled a little too enthusiastically at whatever he had just uttered. He had the kind of handshake that lingered 1 beat too long, the gaze that felt slightly too piercing, the type of self-assurance that is genuine yet clearly rehearsed. He was charismatic. I'll admit that he was extremely skilled at it. Then his eyes settled on me. I was standing by myself, wearing a basic shirt, no crowd around me, just calmly sipping my beverage and observing the scene, and I could see the quick mental assessment on his face, the kind people make when sizing someone up and deciding their place. Whatever judgment Derek reached about me in that instant wasn't particularly positive. He eventually walked over. Rachel had also seen him and came across to make the introduction, clearly delighted, as if she had been looking forward to this exact moment. "Derek, this is my husband, James." A warm smile lit up her face. Proud, genuine, Derek shook my hand, strong grip. Held it just a moment longer than usual. He gave me a quick head-to-toe glance in that manner some men use, thinking they're being discreet when they are. "James," he said, as though testing the name, "so you're the well-known husband. Rachel has mentioned you." Then he smiled and added, "What is it that you do?" And there it was, the question. The one that, in settings like this, is never simply a question. It's an evaluation, it's a comparison. It's that invisible measuring stick people bring out at social events to decide how much regard you deserve. I answered plainly, "I manage a small fund." He nodded in the manner people do when they've already mentally moved past you. Nice, he said, and then promptly turned toward Rachel and began discussing some office matter. Just like that, I was neatly categorized, labeled, dismissed. And here I must be completely truthful with you. It didn't trouble me. Not at all. I've been in enough situations to realize that the most vocal person isn't necessarily the most influential one. And I figured out long ago that there's a unique kind of pleasure in being misjudged. You simply remain calm, you stay composed, and you allow the situation to unfold naturally. But then the challenge arose. Roughly an hour into the gathering, someone proposed a little activity. One of those typical group exercises that office events always seem to feature, especially once everyone has had a few drinks and questionable ideas start sounding brilliant. The activity was straightforward, a knowledge quiz focused on finance and business topics with the crowd split into teams, and Derek, being Derek, took charge of it, naturally. He organized the attendees into groups. When he reached me, he hesitated for a second, glanced around and then announced, loud enough for those close by to catch it, "James, why don't you join the junior group? Let the experienced folks have a fair shot." A few people chuckled. Not cruelly, just lightly, as though it was the obvious decision, as though the man who runs a small fund clearly belonged with the entry-level youngsters. Rachel's smile grew a little strained. I noticed it, just a brief change. She glanced at me and I gave her a small nod that meant, "Don't worry, it's okay." But then Derek, clearly feeling quite sure of himself that evening, decided to raise the stakes. He looked straight at me and said, "Actually, James, here's a wager. If you and your group manage to defeat my team, I will personally double Rachel's upcoming bonus. And if you lose," he paused dramatically, flashing a wide grin and playing to the crowd, "you'll spend the rest of the night as my personal drink server." More laughter followed. Easy, self-assured laughter. The sort that arises when an entire room has already decided the outcome before the contest even begins. I looked at him for a second. Then I replied, "Sure, that seems reasonable." He appeared mildly taken aback that I accepted so readily, as if he had expected me to brush it aside or find a reason to decline. But I simply smiled, picked up my glass, and walked over to join the junior team. The young people on my team were genuinely nice. They were in their mid-20s, early in their careers, a bit anxious around the boss, a little starstruck at being part of such a glamorous event. One of them, a young woman named Priya, leaned closer and whispered, "No pressure, but Derek's group wins this every single year." I just nodded and asked, "Tell me about the questions. What areas, markets, mergers and acquisitions, corporate strategy, risk evaluation, worldwide economic patterns?" I nearly chuckled aloud. The contest began and the opening round stayed fairly even. Derek's team was strong, no doubt about it. These were seasoned professionals. They knew the material well. But around the third round, the momentum started to change. I began responding promptly, with the kind of precise insight that doesn't come from books alone, but from actually being in those meetings, making those decisions, experiencing it firsthand. I could sense the atmosphere in our small section of the terrace shifting. Priya and the others started regarding me with a new expression. And gradually, others nearby began paying closer attention as well. By the fifth round, Derek's team had fallen behind. And Derek noticed his relaxed smile had grown slightly tighter. He started answering more rapidly, more forcefully, as if raising his voice could somehow bridge the difference. But it didn't work. There was one question toward the close, concerning a particular merger situation from roughly 8 years earlier. The kind of obscure detail you would only recall if you had been directly involved in transactions at that scale. The host read it aloud, and silence fell over both groups. Then I calmly provided the answer. The complete answer, including background, the real financial result, and the name of the secondary company that had been integrated in the restructuring, something most people had long forgotten. The host stared at his card, then looked up. "That is entirely accurate." The room fell silent in a completely new way. Derek stared at me. That effortless self-confidence had transformed into something more cautious, something more measured. "Where did you say you worked again?" he asked. I hadn't really specified earlier. I had only mentioned running a small fund, which was technically correct, depending on your definition of small. I looked at him steadily and said, I oversee a private equity fund. We currently manage around $4.3 billion in assets. You might recognize one of our portfolio companies. Actually, you made a presentation to our investment committee back in 2019. We decided against it, but it was a strong proposal. You could have heard a champagne flute drop. Derek's expression shifted rapidly through several emotions in a matter of seconds: shock, reassessment, a brief hint of discomfort. Then he laughed, but it was a different kind of laugh this time. Quieter, less assured. "You're James Calloway," he said. "I am," I replied. Now I should clarify something. In the professional world where Rachel works, my name carries some recognition. There had been a few mentions, industry pieces, a profile in a specialist magazine, a note in the financial media after we finalized a major transaction the previous year. I don't pursue the attention, but it's there. And apparently Derek had come across enough of it to recognize exactly who James Calloway was. He simply had never linked that name to Rachel's quiet, plainly dressed husband standing alone by the bar. The entire atmosphere in the room had now completely transformed. People were now regarding me the same way they had been looking at Derek earlier. And Rachel, my wonderful Rachel, stood across the terrace with her hand covering her mouth and moisture in her eyes. I couldn't quite tell if she was about to laugh or cry. It turned out she was doing both. Derek cleared his throat. "Well," he said, and for a moment seemed to lack words to continue, which may have been a first for him. "I suppose Rachel will be receiving that bonus." "Double," I gently reminded him with a smile. "Double," he confirmed, "but here is the part I really want you to reflect on. Because the bonus, the contest, the expressions on everyone's faces, none of that was the most meaningful moment for me that evening. The moment that truly counted came much later. When the gathering was slowing down and Rachel and I found ourselves standing alone on the terrace for a few minutes, with the city lights sparkling below us and the cool breeze surrounding us. She turned to me and said, "You never mentioned it." And I answered, "You never needed me to be anything except your husband." She paused quietly for a second. Then she continued, "I've been working so hard to establish myself here, and you never turned it into something about yourself. It was never supposed to be about me," I told her. "It has always been about you." She moved closer and rested against me, and we simply stood there together for some time. And that instant, that peaceful, warm, authentic moment on a chilly rooftop, meant more to me than every transaction I've ever completed, every write-up, every figure in every portfolio. Because here's what I want you to remember. There are individuals in this world who enter every space needing everyone to recognize who they are, needing the approval, the acknowledgement, the turning heads. And I get it, I really do. Society teaches us that being seen equals worth, that position equals importance, that your value is measured by how strongly the room reacts when you arrive. But there is another way to navigate through life, more subdued, more consistent. Not because you lack anything to contribute, but because you are so confident in what you possess that you don't feel the need to broadcast it. You allow your actions to speak when the time comes. You make patience part of your approach, and you make sure the people who truly care about you understand the real you, not the image the world has built, but the actual person. The one who drives a normal car, wears straightforward clothes, and stands alone at gatherings, quietly observing the room. Derek sent Rachel a message 2 days afterward to express regret. She mentioned it to me casually as if it didn't matter much, and perhaps it didn't, but I believe for Derek something changed that evening as well. I believe he gained some insight about making quick judgments, about the unassuming man near the counter, about how the most formidable individual in any gathering is almost never the one who speaks the loudest. As for Rachel, she received her bonus. And then, 3 months later, she earned a promotion she had been striving for over 2 years. Not because of me, but because of her own efforts, because of every late night, every missed meal, and every weekend she had dedicated to her work. I simply happened to be the husband standing quietly in the corner, watching, waiting, incredibly proud, and prepared when the right moment arrived. Some evenings I still recall that terrace. The crisp air, her resting her head on my shoulder. The city continuing its endless rhythm, moving, shining, never pausing. And I think, yes, that was a fine evening. That was a truly fine evening.